we've seen this before, like in the dark ages of AI, there was another revolution around imaging. Everyone thought all the radiologists are going to lose their job because this is all becoming automated. AI is going to do all the interpretation of radiology results, MRIs, X-rays, and so on. There won't be any more need for radiologists. And in fact, what we see is that there's more radiologists than ever. As a result of all this automation, the demand has gone up a lot.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Page, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. Every year we spend billions trying to bring new drugs to market, yet most still take over a decade to actually reach patient. The process is slow, it's complex, it's filled with red tape, but what if AI could help change that? And today on the Talking AI podcast, we're diving into one of the most critical and sometimes overlooked areas in healthcare clinical trials. My guest, Patrick Leung, CTO and co-founder of Faro Health, a company using AI to make trials faster, smarter, and more effective, is on with us today. Welcome to Talking AI, Patrick.
Glad to be here, Matt.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. And I got to say, I am not a healthcare expert, but some of the stuff I'm seeing from a lot of the experts on AI, this is going to be a major impacted area. But I'm curious, what specifically with clinical trials, what makes the trials so slow and expensive? I'm reading that stat, 10 years, billions of dollars. It's insane. What's your, the current state of things? Why does it take so long?
I think that it's taken decades to get to this point.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when I go to conferences or I'm on these podcasts, I talk about Eroom's law, which is a bit of dark humor on the part of the life sciences industry, and that they've taken Moore's law, which is the classic doubling of chip density and computing power every 18 months. They have their own version of that called Eroom's law, whereby the cost and time required to get new drugs to market doubles every 9 years. And that's held over the last 50 years, at least, probably 60 or 70 by now. So anyway, that's resulted over time in this huge increase, this exponential increase in cost and time. And there's a number of different reasons for that. So the original author of the paper that introduced this concept or this effect talked about things like, over time, the number of new drugs keeps on going up, but the number of conditions doesn't. And so you end up with drugs trying to treat an existing condition that's already being treated by an existing drug. And so the bar for actually creating a new drug goes higher and higher as the existing treatments get better. Similarly, once in a while, you get a crisis like the opioid crisis, for instance. Things like are definitely going to cause regulators to pay more attention, to be more conservative, and to try to prevent crises like that from occurring after a drug's been released. And so there's a couple of other factors like that, but over time, they conspire to really result in this dramatic increase in cost that we've seen.
The stat kind of blew my mind because I'm not a healthcare expert by any means, but billions of dollars, 10 years to get drugs to market, and it didn't seem to be getting any faster. What is driving that? What's driving these bottlenecks in the process?
Yeah, it's actually been a cumulative effect over the past 50 or 60 years. In fact, we have this phenomenon called Eroom's law. That's a bit of a sort of dark take on Moore's law, which is the doubling of transistor density every 18 months. So with Eroom's law, we have the doubling of costs that it takes to take a pharmaceutical from inception to market that doubles every 9 years. And so that's held over the last, it's inflation adjusted. Yeah.
Wow. That's the opposite of what we want, is going the other way.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a number of different reasons for that, right? I mean, the original author of the paper that introduced this effect said that one example is over time, the standard of care, the standard treatment for a given condition will get better and better over time as new drugs are introduced. And therefore, given the fact that there aren't all these new conditions to be treated necessarily, you have drugs competing to actually treat a condition that's already pretty well treated. And there's a higher bar for that drug to reach the market in order to actually be approved. So that's one thing over time that leads to just more cost. There's another effect where, if you look at the opioid crisis, it's a recent example, right? Where a drug that already made it to market has some real problems and risks that weren't originally evident. That causes the regulators to become more conservative. They don't want that to happen anymore. They're going to look back and say, what mistakes did we make? How can we do our part to make sure that these things don't happen again? And as a result, they get more and more conservative and careful over time. With good reason, but over time, this sort of conspire to really result in that doubling every 9 years that I mentioned before.
Yeah, so there's the positive side, but also that additional red tape, in essence, that's accelerating things in a sense. And I guess, so AI obviously has wide-ranging impacts. But where is it being applied within clinical trials? Where are the areas that it's actually helping accelerate things? Or where are you starting to see these patterns emerge, I suppose?
There's a number of different areas. We've been at this for over 2 years now, just looking at how to apply the latest large language model technology to
Yeah.
help make these clinical trials better. And so one obvious area that there's a lot of attention and action around is clinical writing. And so you'll see out there, a lot of people, ourselves included, are really applying these large language models to try to automate the generation of complex clinical documentation that's required for the trial. And in many cases, that can really soak up a lot of time and resources to create multi-hundred-page documents that need to be at a really high level of quality that get submitted to the regulators and that essentially outline the whole clinical trial. And so what we've done at Faro is we have this very advanced design tool that clinical scientists can use to design the clinical trial in a really easy to use interface, and it gets stored in this very structured repository. And we use that data combined with the large language model's ability to generate text into this architecture that allows the automatic generation of these documents. And that's one area where we're definitely spending a lot of time applying AI to make this better.
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm assuming, what do you think is the range of what that used to take in the past, where it was humans actually doing that versus today, the delta in terms of time savings there?
We're talking about days and months, or let's just say
Wow.
weeks and months being
Yeah,
compressed into less than a day, in some cases less than an hour. And so this is
that's
for a first
insane.
draft. And of course, there's
Yeah.
probably some wordsmithing and some additional edits that are required invariably, but it'll get you 80% plus of the way there in a matter of an hour or less, which is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. And so I guess on the flip side, if you're using AI to generate this, let me ask you this first. My mind always goes to this with healthcare is hallucinations and things related to that. Because when you have applications of AI, the riskier areas, a lot of people are very hesitant to do things, especially in the healthcare space. How does that get factored in? How do you account for hallucinations where the risk level is much higher versus other? I'm writing a blog, some social copy. Okay, it's on the little wrong, not a big deal. Anything healthcare related, I feel like the radar is just much higher in terms of the risk.
And not only is the cost of failure really high, like you get this wrong, it might delay the trial, or even worse, it might even impact patients' lives in a negative way. But
Exactly. Yeah.
also, the content itself is complex. If you look at a clinical trial, like the document that serves as the root of all the 10 years plus that you might be going through this process, there's tons of really nitty-gritty technical details there around pharmacokinetics and around inclusion and exclusion criteria, all sorts of scheduling information, side effects. There's tons of data in there. And
Mhm.
so one way to ensure that the trial is factually correct is to have this really structured way of representing the trial. And so you can query that and put the data very selectively into each section where it's needed of the trial. And then the other thing, of course, is that we ended up developing this architecture, this kind of agentic architecture. I know it's a buzzword right now, agents and all this kind of thing, but we have
Oh, yes.
one of our agents, one of our intelligent agents, essentially can evaluate the output of the generated content and essentially ask it questions and say, did you include information about how to contact the patient once they leave the trial and follow up? And did you include various other things and factually checking and all this kind of basically evaluation that ensures that the quality of the content is high? And so this helps to take the place of human review. It doesn't entirely eliminate it, of course, but it really helps to ensure that what we're generating is of decent quality and doesn't do obvious omissions or hallucinations or things like that.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, especially like folks listening. This is how you need to be thinking about AI systems in a way. Like you need to build in these feedback loops. And that's a perfect example of that. You look at like reasoning models today, they're doing this chain of thought reasoning, they're breaking down problems into smaller steps. That's a great approach to solve difficult problems, but you're architecting it in a way to where the agent is, it's almost like a counterbalance in a sense. So human in the loop's great, but I love that approach of almost having agent in the loop in a sense, like throughout your process.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's always going to be the iterative process whereby the final published version of this document has to go through multiple revisions, as it does
Yeah.
during a manual writing process as well. And I think there's, because of, as you mentioned rightly so before, the cost of failure is so high, the stakes are so high with this clinical documentation, there's always going to be humans needed to put their stamp of approval. It's not like generating an email or an image where you can potentially send it off without even really looking very closely at it, because we've seen this before. Like in the dark ages of AI, like 10 years ago, there was another revolution around imaging, right? And so for a while, everyone thought, oh no, all the radiologists are going to lose their job because basically this is all becoming automated. AI is going to do all the interpretation of radiology results, MRIs, X-rays, and so on. And no more need for humans. There won't be any more need for radiologists. And in fact, what we found 10 years later is that there's more radiologists than ever. And it's simply because as a result of all this automation, the demand has gone up a lot. The cost has come down, the demand has gone up. Nowadays, you get imaging. If you take your rotator cuff, you get an MRI right away. And so that has increased the demand for human review. And so radiologists are more numerous than ever, despite the automation of, in fact, in some ways, because of the automation introduced by AI. So that's pretty interesting.
It's such a powerful thing too, because that is a good thing. If AI can diagnose things and is better at that task, that's great. It allows doctors to do other things, maybe focusing on the patient care. But the piece that you mentioned there, which I wasn't directly thinking about, but we see this in business too, with Jevons paradox with LLMs. When it gets cheaper, easier, better, all these things, you don't use less of it or the same amount, you use a lot more of it. And I think to your point, there's so many underserved folks that need care, that need these things, and they just don't. Right. For whatever reason, cost, access, all these things. And that can bring that down in a massive way, I would imagine. There's obviously all kinds of other dynamics in the healthcare space, but that's powerful. I was not even thinking about that. And then obviously improving diagnosis and things like that. I want to jump to that in a second, but I'm curious on the clinical trials, the documentation and all of that. How, on average, how long would you say the documentation is? Is this like 50 pages, 100, 1,000 pages? Give me your like average in a sense.
A clinical protocol document ranges typically from 100 to 200 pages. Some are longer, some are shorter, depending on the nature of the trial. In general, oncology trials, meaning cancer trials, are more complex for a number of different reasons. They're longer, they require a whole bunch more assessments, like all this kind of thing. And so it varies, but it gives you an idea. This is for the clinical trial protocol, which is a blueprint for the whole trial. And there's a bunch of other documents that come further down the line. The informed consent form, the lab report, the CSR, like all these documents that oftentimes use the protocol as input. So that's why we started with the protocol. Is number one, it's really hard to get right. And so we figured we would tackle something really challenging that other people might have trouble with, because we have this really unique tool that we've built, the Faro Study Designer, that allows you to actually model the trials properly and receive insights and analytics and all that kind of thing. And so then after that, a lot of these other documents become easier because you have this source document, the protocol, and in many cases, it's just adapting what we've already used to generate the protocol in order to generate the other documents. But it gives you an idea. Overall, during the course of a clinical trial, many thousands of pages. It's a 10-year project and requires tons of documentation. So our dream is in the future, maybe we won't need so many documents because we can represent the trial in a more structured electronic way. This is basically protocol digitization, something we believe very strongly in. And so maybe we can just submit electronically, the same way you submit your taxes electronically these days, right? To the IRS. You can submit your protocol electronically, the FDA receives it and is able to review using a similar system, and things are much more efficient.
That's exactly where my mind went. Is okay, you're using AI, but you're still generating these hundreds of pages of documentation. At what point on the reviewer side are they then leveraging AI to gain the same efficiencies, in a sense? Do you see that on the side of the FDA or other pieces?
Funny you should ask. So recently, this is hot off the press, last month, the FDA announced that they have this new AI tool called ELSA that they're using to analyze these protocol documents. And so we're using AI to generate them. They're using AI to summarize them and decode them and make inferences. And at some point, you won't need the documents anymore. You'll submit using some kind of structured protocol. It'll all be electronic and so on. And again, not to say that takes humans out of the loop. It just means that humans have more powerful tools to summarize and to analyze and to really slice and dice the protocol to make sure that it's going to be okay.
That's so great. I'm like literally Googling it now as we speak. Funny, I use Google instead of ChatGPT.
Yeah, for recent news, sometimes Google is better because GPT is not trained on recent data. Anyway, I was at a conference last week where this was in DC, the DIA conference, and made a nice presentation there. But the FDA was all over the place. Like they were speaking at a lot of these sessions, talking about ELSA and
I
other
bet.
things they're doing. So they're really into this
Bet.
too, which is great to see.
Why? So I have two young daughters. So when you mentioned the name is Elsa, I immediately go to the Disney movies. Was there any meaning behind the Elsa name? I wonder.
I saw that it's in all caps. I'm sure it's an acronym of some kind, but I
Yeah,
didn't take the
yeah, yeah.
trouble to learn what it actually means. It's catchy though. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. So another thing that's interesting to me with your company, Faro Health, you came to be before generative AI and the transformer architecture and ChatGPT and all these things emerged, right? You were doing this in more of a kind of classical AI way. So two things. What does it look like? I'm always interested to talk to companies that were pre ChatGPT, post ChatGPT, if we make that like the seminal moment. And then what did that shift or pivot look like? And I got to imagine there was potentially some resistance from doing it in the classical way to leveraging large language models. And then take me down that path of when that happened. Was there a moment you remember where you first encountered generative AI and you started to think what this could potentially unlock?
Yeah, for sure. In 2023, I was in this mode of figuring out what am I going to do next. And
Yeah.
all signs pointed to life sciences. Like everyone I talked to, I did a bit of consulting that was in the life sciences space, applying large language models. And it was just really a case of it's quite obvious that this is the place where this is going to really take off.
Yeah.
And then when I first started, I was first introduced to Scott Chatham, our CEO and co-founder, and I started talking to him, it really came to life. And he just said to me, look, we need to bring AI into this product. So that's what I'm looking for you to do. And that was really a great challenge because it's just looking at a more or less more traditional SaaS product and really figuring out all the different ways that AI can really augment its capabilities. And in addition to the document generation stuff, this is by way of example, right? So one of the
Mhm.
key features that this product, that our Faro Study Designer tool has, is the ability to provide analytics. So we can tell you very quickly, very early on in your trial's design process, hey, here's your patient burden. Here's how tough this is going to be on the patient, like in terms of blood draw, in terms of time spent. We'll tell you,
Mhm.
hey, here's your cost and complexity. Here's what it's going to be like for sites. So you can really
Oh,
get some
wow.
idea, like how feasible is this project going to be? Is this trial going to fly? Am I going to be able to recruit patients? What did similar trials like this actually end up doing? Did they end up having amendments or not? This kind of things. And
Mm.
so when I was thinking about how to use AI, the obvious one, in addition to generating all these kind of hefty documents, was how do we provide better insights to the end user? How do we
Yeah.
build on our existing advantage of providing analytics and say, okay, now we have AI, we can double down on the analytics and provide some really interesting insights into how your trial compares to all the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of trials that are out there in the world. We can use AI to analyze them and essentially give you some comparison, benchmark, and all this kind of interesting stuff that's super useful in terms of designing the trial. Now, if you check out our website, you'll see we published a paper with Merck about this. We published a huge pharmaceutical company, right? And
Yeah.
we just studied what is the impact of making design adjustments and optimizations early on in the trial's design process, right? So instead of incurring the cost, you foresee them through these analytics. And the
Yeah.
answer was,
Yeah.
for a decent sized trial, you could save $100 million over the lifetime of the trial.
Oh my
Crazy amount
gosh,
of money.
wow.
Just by making the right design choices, just by only including the assessments you actually need for this trial. So that was pretty remarkable. It was a really good validation of this strategy of focusing on the upfront design of the trial.
And so what was that moment like? So you were brought in after, when the seminal moment was happening. Was there any hesitation in using the frontier models out there? Was there ever any consideration, oh, we have to build our own proprietary thing? Because there's always this debate of, are you just an AI wrapper? But I feel like in this context, there's the deep domain expertise, which is really where the value and the differentiation comes into play, and you're simply leveraging what is a tool in a sense in terms of the LLM.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for sure. Over time, the foundation models becoming more and more capable, and they're ingesting more and more domain-specific information, and so on and so forth. But when you really start looking at the actual process of creating clinical trials with a real sponsor, with a drug company or a
Yeah.
biotech company or what have you, then there's just a lot of nuance there that's really detailed. All those checklists I was talking to you about before to evaluate the generated content, we're fortunate in that we have a clinical sciences team. And in fact, our CEO, co-founder, God, is a clinical scientist. He worked at Novartis and Verily in the past, really top companies in this space. And so that helps a lot to have that domain expertise embedded in very deeply in the company and everything we build. And I think a lot of this is just direct experience. It's just like we have a bunch of companies that are really using this to optimize their clinical trials and so on, and just getting that real world feedback and embedding the feedback into our product. And that agentic architecture I told you about before, definitely there's a lot of expertise built into that. So I'm not super worried about being eclipsed by a foundation model or any of this kind of thing. It's more a case of finding the best tools for the job and really keeping abreast of all the advances out there. I know Anthropic and Google and others are really super into this life sciences space. And last week at the conference, I had a pretty strong presence. It was good to see them there. So it's exciting. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of new cool things coming out every month. And so just keeping abreast of it all is quite a challenge.
I think too, this is a case where as the models get better, your product gets better as a byproduct of that, which is like a great example of riding that wave in a sense instead of being eclipsed by it in a sense.
When we started looking at this, it was, I think 3.5 had just come out or something, or that was the kind of standard cutting edge GPT model. And then when 4.0 came out, a lot of the things that didn't work so well before, we just retried, and many of them actually worked a lot better. And so it is a really cool thing to just not be on the static base, to actually, every time there's a new model that comes out, we can look at it and say, okay, how can this help us be even better? And that's exciting, and also a little chaotic. Like the whole DeepSeek thing that happened late last year was super interesting, like breaking everyone's assumptions around price and many other things. And so there's this arms race going on, right, between these big vendors that have the resources and wherewithal to actually produce these foundation models. And I think it benefits everybody, really, just as long as we have the capability to easily adapt and try out the latest things and adopt the latest models if it turns out that they actually are better.
And do you all use reasoning models in any particular applications? Do you leverage kind of 4.0 as the base one? Any testing around some different reasoning models and leveraging some of those capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at Anthropic and Gemini and many other models as they become available. We looked at DeepSeek as well. So the good news is for us is we had these evaluation criteria. So we know pretty quickly when a model works better for us by just running it against a standard test suite and looking at the results, like how many tests passed. And so that's a great way of doing this, because oftentimes it is a little bit whack-a-mole. Like maybe there's a new model that's better at some things, at generating some kinds of content. Maybe it's more natural in tone, but maybe it doesn't quite have the same depth of research capabilities. And so there's just like a lot that we can look at there.
I don't know why this thought's never popped in my head, but what you just said just triggered this new idea. It's almost like this new mechanism you should have as part of your process product, whatever it is, that you are able to validate and test new models as they come to be in a structured way, right? So it's not just willy-nilly, and it becomes more efficient in terms of saying, okay, here's the latest and greatest model. Let's put it through its paces in a sense to see how it performs. And you could actually put some tests around that to where it is a structured process. I've never thought about it in that sense. That's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, quite like in the sense that we already have a battery of different general purpose tests. In fact, some of them are specific around, for instance, answering grad level science questions. This was a new one. If you look at the Stanford AI report, they publish this every year, and they really do look at like, how are these various models doing? How is AI in general doing as far as its performance on a range of different sort of typically human tasks, like answering grad level science questions. And in the most recent report was the 2025 report. They have a couple new tests in there that look at some new capabilities, and they look at over the past year, like how has AI progressed. And the scary thing about this graph is that the gradient of each new chart is like steeper and steeper. So in one case, actually, this grad level test I mentioned before, like it went from being new, essentially AI didn't do well at all, to surpassing human performance in a year. So that's really, wow, the chart really is getting steeper and steeper in terms of the acceleration of AI models to surpass human performance. So it's really interesting. And so my point was that basically there are a battery of these tests that we can run against, that are being run against every single new model. But that said, it still, I think, is helpful to actually create your own test. So you can evaluate these models yourself and see for your particular use case, is a given model that seems to be doing really well in these general tests actually better for what you're doing.
Exactly. And that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, we've talked a lot about kind of clinical trials, that process. Go wider for me. Stay in the healthcare domain. What other areas within the healthcare domain do you see interesting, novel, whatever qualifier you want to put it on it, use cases in the healthcare space? Like what gets you most excited or is most interesting?
I think there are two cool areas. If we carve out our cool area of clinical
Yeah.
trial design and then downstream operational optimization, I think that certainly for some time now, there's been a whole bunch of innovation around drug discovery and around new treatment pathways. And at this conference I was at last week, they were talking about just engineering stem cells and using them to form
Mm.
these beta cells that they then implant into pancreas. And so you can essentially treat type 1 diabetes, which afflicts millions and millions of people
Wow.
worldwide,
Wow.
particularly in this country. And
Yeah.
so it's just science fiction stuff. And there's so many things like that, right? Where there's these revolutionary, oftentimes genetic based medicine. And there's this kind of vision like maybe one day medicine will be completely personalized and the medicine will be engineered with your genome and your phenotype in mind. So it's
Yeah.
truly the Matt Page medicine for treating whatever disorder you might
Yeah.
have. And
Health.
there's like a gradual evolution from where we are today to that future world of like custom medicine that's completely tailored to you, hopefully nearly no side effects as a result, all this kind of thing, right? So that's exciting. And that also fuels what we do because no matter how cool your medicine is, you still have to get it through approval, right? You still have to do clinical
Exactly.
trials. So
Exactly.
it's super exciting for us because we get to be a part of all of this, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
I would
awesome.
say this is thing number one. That's super cool stuff. And then I think also like on the healthcare side, there's been all this interesting application of AI in terms of just treating the patient. Like, how do you take care of your patients better? How do you interpret their results better? How do you make their experience during these trials or even just receiving treatment on site better?
Yeah.
How do you do at-home treatment? There's all these interesting new applications to just try to make healthcare easier on the patient because it's easy to forget. Hey, these people are many times spending hours and hours on these sites, participating in trials or undergoing treatment or whatever. And like that's taking time out of their family and the work time, right? And furthermore, a lot of these trials require a lot of different measurements. And so you're taking their blood, you're doing all these things to them. And after a while, that
Mhm.
kind of adds up. And so anything we can do to make these trials accessible and like desirable to participate in helps everybody, right? Because oftentimes one of the biggest challenges that clinical trials face is that they have trouble enrolling the right patients. And
Mm.
historically, we've had this problem where a lot of the trials actually focus on white males. And believe it or not, the physiology for someone of the same height and weight is radically different. And the
Mm.
response to drugs is really different based on gender and race.
Yeah.
And so we need to have diverse trials. As a result, we need to enroll more patients. As a result, we need to take care of these patients during the trial and give them a good experience. So I'm really excited about the different wearables and new biomarkers and new ways of tracking patient behavior and results and all this stuff that is on the other side of this, right? When you actually get into the nitty gritty operational details of the clinical trial and what happens with the experience.
There's so many use cases. And I want to hit on one piece too, because there is also a lot of hype around what will be possible with AI. And this is one quote I got from Anthropic's CEO. And in our space of coding and generation, all code will be written by AI. And I think he said 6 to 12 months. But on the healthcare side, he mentioned this is back in October. He said he believes AI could, in the next 7 to 12 years, help treat nearly all infectious diseases, eliminate most cancers, cure genetic disorders, halt Alzheimer's at early stages. And in the next 5 to 10 years, thanks to conditions like PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, all these different things can be genetically prevented. This just insane claims in a sense. But I'm curious, like, what's your thoughts on that on your hype barometer? I'd be curious there from the Anthropic CEO.
Yeah, I think I'm a technologist. I'm a CTO, so I get
Yeah.
caught up in this stuff too. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
At the same time, once you've been around this technology industry for a while, you realize like there is this thing that Gardner calls the hype curve. Literally a hype
Yeah.
curve.
Or,
It's not a
yeah.
quantitative thing. You
Yeah.
can't measure this, right? But it's a psychological phenomenon, right? Where people get so
Mhm.
excited. And I actually, at my presentation last week, I actually showed the latest hype curve. I actually made this chart from data I found online,
Oh, wow.
and you can see over time, trust just goes up exponentially. It's crazy. And there's a few reasons for
Wow.
that on the right, the catch cry sort of taglines for each one. But just gives you an idea. Like that is crazy. And that, by the way, is inflation adjusted. How crazy is that? Okay.
Wow.
So then
That's
here we
nuts.
have the way the AI accelerates. Okay. So you got to match this legend over here with these graphs. But I'll tell you right now, like that steep one there just surfaced like a couple of years ago, right? This is the TA Steelan GPQA diamond uh, test. And it went from like nowhere like less than 50%.
So for those
A little over
listening,
100.
it's basically like straight up. This is what I imagine climbing Mount Everest is like, straight up into the
Yeah, and this one here is interesting because it's not quite as spectacular increase in AI performance, but this is multimodal. This is not just analyzing text. This is like images and other stuff as well. So anyway, you can read the Stanford AI Index report for more if you want, but there's a lot of interesting information about how AI is. Okay, and then the third thing I wanted to share was the hype curve. Here it is. This is the AI hype curve. Like it's only got AI technologies because they have hype curves for other technologies too.
Yeah.
And as you can see, we are now entering into we've gone from the innovation trigger and the peak of an inflated expectation to the trough of disillusionment. Doesn't that sound sad? So I dug up some actual facts to back this up because this is not basically on quantitative information. It's more just Gartner's take on where things are at with various AI technologies. And there's generative AI is right there sliding down the curve, right? And this is about a 2 to 5 year trough, according to them. So they're not quite so bullish on the stuff as other people are, maybe. So anyway, 42% is a factoid for you. 42% of companies are abandoning their generative AI pilot projects in 2025, up from 17%. So that's a sure sign that people are getting frustrated and starting to realize the limitations to this. It's not as cool as they thought, whatever. And then down here, specifically for life sciences, what are the reasons for this? 79% lack of AI expertise. Hardly surprising, right? Once you get past the big stuff of prompt engineering, you need AI specialists. You need people who really know what they're doing and measure results of all this kind of thing. And most companies don't have those people. They're super in demand right now. It took us months and months to find our AI people this year, really in demand. So anyway, that gives you an idea of where we're at. So as a result, I don't think we're going to be curing cancer anytime soon with AI, but I do think that what we can do is really help these innovative new treatments that I talked about before, this genetic medicine and all this kind of stuff, get through trials faster and get it into people's hands. So it won't take 10 years. Maybe it'll take 5 years. Who knows? We need to equip all the drug companies and biotech companies out there that are coming up with these cool new treatments. We just need to equip them with the right tools so they get through their regulatory process faster.
It's funny on the hype curve. I keep trying to like exactly what Gartner did here. It's like at some points I feel like we've reached the hype or we're starting to get into the trough of disillusionment. And then other times I'm like, oh man, the hype just feels like it keeps going. So it's very interesting in that regard. And I think too, like a key point I think to understand, it was the same thing with the internet and all of this. People in the early days, the dot-com bubble and all that, they had it. It just took time to get there in a sense. So we may see a similar thing with generative AI and LLMs and whatnot. It's with things will get caught up in the hype and crash and burn, and which ones will have staying power and which ones will come to be later on, even though the hypothesis was right originally.
Yeah, like for instance, AI coding, right? Maybe this is an area it sounded like you had some experience with. So, like it's really spectacular. Like you can do certain things so fast, crazy, and crazy fast. And you don't need to have any coding experience whatsoever. You can just tell the cursor or Lovable or whatever it is what to do, like using plain English, or throw out images. You can just get on the back of a napkin, take a photo, and then give it to the AI and it'll do something. So it's really good at this stuff. Just brand new de novo proof of concept, get an operational prototype running. Things change a little bit when you start dealing with a complex enterprise-grade code base.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure over time there'll be a moving frontier of, wow, now it can do things better than it used to really suck at. And so now you can trust it more to go and change an existing code base and do a refactoring or whatever the case may be. But I don't know about you, but my experience has been that it often forgets things. It often thinks that everything works and it doesn't at all. It repeats the same mistakes. There's a lot of, we're at the early stages here. We're in the like 1995, 1996 level of .com. Speaking as a .com survivor of that era, right? Now, I do think there are some special things about this particular technology revolution. AI, I think it speaks to us as human beings and it scares us and inspires us in ways that other technology revolutions have not. It's hard to get emotionally excited or fearful about a transistor or about a website. Maybe it depends on the website, but even about a mobile device. Mobile device is not kind of like the iPhone is not coming to take your job necessarily, right? But with AI, there's that other dimension, right? We already have this whole cultural substrate of science fiction, of dystopian science fiction movies, and just various sort of warnings and hopes and dreams about how we might be able to solve our problems. So we have a lot more layered in here psychologically, as well as the technology itself being so easily accessible. Like you can use it, wield it, do amazing things with it instantly. And that's really, really remarkable. Even in the old days in .com, you still had to know HTML. And then eventually there were tools available, but not everyone was on Squarespace creating websites. It was a specialized thing. Everybody's using AI now. Everybody. And that so interesting to me, like just anthropologically, what that's going to do to us as a species and what the impact is going to be on society. We just don't know yet, but it's super
Yeah.
interesting.
I've had the same thought that you're talking about right now because it feels very similar to other major transformations and innovations when they emerge. But there's something about this technology, the human aspect of it, or mimicking of how we work as humans in terms of our ability to pattern match, use reasoning, use logic, all of those things that it has, that makes me wonder, will it be different? Maybe not. I guess time will tell, like with all things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly think that we will be able to do things we absolutely could not do before.
Yeah.
And the average person will be able to do things they could only dream of. They already are. Everybody can be an artist
Yeah.
now. Everybody can be a writer.
Yeah.
And we're not talking Da Vinci level or level writing or anything, but we are talking like a dramatic increase in capabilities for the average person. And so that's really unusual. That means that there are going to be people out there who maybe can really unleash their creative talent or discover gifts that they didn't know they had and things like that. So I don't necessarily think it means the end of humanity or the mass loss of jobs, but there will be disruption. Absolutely, there will be.
Yeah.
There's this quote by, I can't remember her name. It's the former CEO of Microsoft, of IBM, who said, AI will not replace people, but people who are able to use AI effectively will replace people who can't.
Yeah.
Inevitably, in a ever increasing sphere of human activity, that will be the case. And I think I would extend that. I'll make my own version of that, which is that organizations that are able to wield AI effectively and incorporate it into their processes and their products will replace organizations who do not. And that is,
Yes.
the very definition of disruption that Clayton Christensen talks about in The Innovator's Dilemma, and there's a lot of literature around this. But I think that there's going to be massive disruption amongst companies, including SaaS companies, not unlike my own, that are unable to cross this divide and really adopt AI wholesale, where they will get disrupted because they will get outpaced and out-innovated and so on.
Yeah. And it's just a natural thing. And I'll leave folks with this. I tell this to people all the time. Don't feel like you're behind. I'd say you've never been closer to the starting line of some major new innovation than you are right now. So that's the one thing. Don't write this off as, oh, it's already progressed too far. I'm behind. I'm just even going to start. Lean into it. Start and just start playing with the tools. That's the big thing too. You don't have to be some crazy smart CTO like Patrick here to start using the tools because of what it can enable. That's the cool thing about this innovation. But Patrick,
I guess I'll just build on that and say, with the internet kind of revolution, there was this time during which people were saying things, wow, now you can start a company and build a SaaS service or some kind of really awesome web-based product or mobile product so easily, much more easily than before. And that is even more true now. There's now all this kind of literature out there about the 3-person startup. You just need one person who's into numbers, one person who's into words, and one person, I don't know, is into people, something like that. And so absolutely, we're at the early stage of this. We've only just begun, believe it or not. This revolution has only just begun. There's going to be a lot more innovation, and let's just see where it goes. But just play with it. Let's try stuff out.
What was it that Sam Altman said? We'll have the solo founder that, has a company at, I forget what he said, 100 million or whatnot. But we actually just recently, there was a 6-month-old company, a single owner. It was just one person. It was and sold to Wix for $80 million. So there's an example for you. He basically built this vibe coding tool that Wix has bought. So the solo unicorn prediction, you're starting to see some inklings of it start to emerge, which is interesting.
Yeah, in many cases, the only limit is your imagination.
Yeah.
Once you have a really awesome idea, it's now so much easier to make that become an actual product that people can use.
Yeah. It's a good stopping point right there, Patrick. Thanks for being on Talking AI. So where can people find Faro Health, learn more about this, the really cool work that you're doing?
You can just check out our website at farohealth.com, and you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. On there, you can search for me.
Nice. Thanks for talking to me, Patrick.
All right. Real pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com.